Hello, everyone. Our today's guest is Henry Holtz. You can find his socials on the episode description. Henry, thank you so much for joining me. We'll explore the limitations of the human mind and esoteric philosophy. My first question to you is most people experience life as a constant stream of thought, assuming awareness is just another thought in the mix. But
hmm
in deep meditation, there's a realization that awareness itself is prior to thought. How do you describe this shift in perception, and what are the biggest barriers preventing people from experiencing it directly?
Yeah. Well, first of all, very glad to be here. Starting right off in the deep end, which is great because there's really no shallow end to this topic. So, you said a couple things. The first one is the perception that awareness is just another component within the mix of experience of our daily life, and that there can be a shift to experiencing thoughts as a small component that appears in awareness, with awareness being recognized as a standalone element.
Mm.
And how can we make this shift come about? So I would suggest that the second way you describe that is actually the case the whole time throughout an entire human's life. Awareness is the component in which thoughts appear.
Yeah.
And there's a mechanism within the body and thought where there's a sort of tension, a sense of being localized as yourself. The self, the sense of me that everybody walks around with.
Mm-hmm.
And from that tension, that's kind of like the soil from which thoughts can come and claim everything else as mine. So it feels like this sense of tension, this sense of being localized, is what owns awareness. And we often generally don't explore the awareness very deeply. And when that's the case, when we feel like that, there's a sense of constant discomfort when we feel like we own awareness and that there's a we here that owns it.
Yeah.
And the good news is, since that's not actually the case, since it's the case that the entire time that whole system was just a phenomenon appearing within awareness, we don't have to do anything to make it the case. And in order to recognize that it's the case, all it takes is pausing the thought mechanism. Because for you to seem like you're a separate entity that owns awareness, the thoughts have to keep going and going and going. Pausing allows consciousness to expand on its own. And then consciousness will identify yourself as consciousness and notice that all thoughts appear within you. And that's how it happens, generally.
Yeah, I think for most of us, awareness feels like it's trapped inside the thought stream rather than something that precedes it. And I've noticed that even when I try to observe my thoughts, there's often this subtle assumption that I am the thinker rather than the awareness behind the thoughts.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And we can just explore the absurdity of it too, because thoughts don't really know anything about awareness. It's your awareness that is seeing the thoughts. It's not the other way around. So for example, and you can try this, anyone listening can check this. If you look at your perceptions that are occurring now, so maybe sound of my voice, the sensation of your body, or a sight. Let's just take your visual perception.
Yeah.
Can your visual perception see your thoughts?
No.
No, it's just a perception. Can a thought, let's take the thought, Salvador's podcast, right?
Yeah.
How do you say your podcast name, by the way?
Eudaimoniac.
Eudaimoniac.
It's actually from a word.
Eudaimoniac. I
Yeah.
love the Eudaimoniac podcast. Let's take that thought. Can that thought see awareness?
No,
Can it see anything?
no.
So where you're looking from to see that thought is awareness.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
always the case, is what's revealed when you look at that.
yeah. I'm curious to know, how long do you practice meditation?
Yeah. So for me, currently, the practice that's serving me very well is just 20 minutes a day, either silent sitting or a deep body scan where you go penetrate deep into the sensations of the body.
Yeah,
That being said, these types of recognitions that we're talking about here, when you realize them, you realize it's always been like this. So it ends up being turning your entire day into your practice. In fact, that's probably the greater component of my practice, is just my whole life. But the 20 minutes is also nice. It's nice to kind of sit in the waterfall of energy. Some beautiful things can happen during that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, 20 minutes
Um,
is great. Serves the beginners and the advanced, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, a lot of people who get into meditation and non-duality end up chasing states, seeking bliss, emptiness, or some imaginary final realization. But the
Oh, yeah.
deeper insights often seem to involve letting go of this search entirely. How do you distinguish between real inner transformation and just another egoic game of self-improvement?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. I mean, you're spot on. I mean, amazing, blissful, out of body experience type states, like full body orgasm type things you can achieve with breath work and deep meditations.
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't you want that? That's great, right? So why do people go to an amusement park? It's the same thing. But you're right. There's a sense in the mind, and I was a huge sufferer of this subconscious sense. And you know, who knows? I like to stay humble. Maybe I still am, because when these things are happening, you don't notice it. It's
Yeah.
driving you without you noticing it.
Mm.
So it's a sense that some big spiritual explosion is going to happen at some point, and you will finally be hooked up with the Giga Chad awareness, the super awareness.
Mm.
Finally, it's like you're almost there, and it just needs to go around this one corner, and you'll finally be in it. You'll finally be experiencing it, and you can finally relax.
Mm.
And that sense is completely wrong. It's just a continual disappointment that all you get is this dog shit awareness that you just walk around with every day. But once that thought stops invalidating the current present moment awareness, it becomes amazing.
Mm.
It's the part of the journey you can't want. It's the part that you don't want. And so
Yeah.
how do your other part of the question, how do you recognize what's a self-improvement kick versus genuine transformation? There's the final awareness, the ultimate awareness is the one that's hearing this podcast. It's the one that's listening to my voice. There's nothing you need to do to get to it or from it. You can't,
Mm.
there's nowhere where it isn't. So in that sense, there's no transformation of that you have to do. But as a rebound mechanism from the mind thinking it's going to arrive at a different destination, there seems to be this process that you have to go through where these unconscious drives will come to the surface over and over again and continue to be seen by the awareness that we've been talking about, the one that's right here. And as that happens, you start traveling lighter and lighter without having those drives being the main focus in life. So that after that process, you would be coming from this awareness more cleanly, you could say. You could be burning a cleaner fuel. And
Hmm.
that's, I would say, a deep transformation on both the inside and the outside.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like most people when start doing meditation, they look at enlightenment as a kind of ultimate truth. Do you think
Right.
there's like ever an endpoint with meditation and introspection or
You never graduate from this. No. You never graduate from spirituality. It's it's just that there's the form which constantly keeps changing. All of your sense perceptions right now, they're constantly changing. They're never going to stop changing.
yeah.
Thoughts, your entire experience of life, every animal, constant change. And then there's the formless component of awareness, which is usually the one we bump into first. You can't see it because it doesn't have a form. That never changes. It's never moving. It can't move. There's nowhere for it to move to. It's reality. Where would reality go?
Hmm.
And what was your question again?
You think like there's
Oh, an endpoint.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, there isn't. That's
Hmm.
that's it. It sometimes will feel like there's just one little piece you need, but there isn't. And you can contextualize this in different ways too, because maybe in a past point of human existence, they thought like when we finally build the combustion engine, that's going to be like the end point for humanity. We'll have all the power we need.
Hmm.
But it's
Yeah.
not. You build the combustion engine, now you want to make a plane. So now you have to make a plane. And now you have a plane, so now you have to make a spaceship. It's always evolving. There's no end point in form. And there's
Yeah.
no solidity that's going to ever occur in the world of form.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, some of the deepest teachings in Buddhism and non-duality suggests that enlightenment is not something to be attained, but for most people, spiritual practice requires efforts. How do you reconcile this paradox of practice versus surrender?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really cool point because a lot of times a practice will suggest or imply that you are not where you want to be and that you are working towards an attainment of some kind.
Hmm.
So for example, like I have an apartment, right? I was actually apartment hunting this morning. I'm I'm in my apartment right now
Yes.
recording with you. But during the day, I work as an engineer. So I go to the construction site. The practice of affirmations, for example, I would never be on the construction site saying to myself, I have an apartment, I have an apartment, I have an apartment. It's just the case.
Yeah.
I know I have an apartment. So for someone to sit there and be saying, I have non dual awareness, I am consciousness, I am light, the only thing it's doing is implying that it's not true. So in
Hmm.
that case, in that way, practice is dangerous and actually will. That's why people can be on this path for 60 years, right? Because
Hmm.
you can just do that forever. So
Yeah.
what the practice would be is, let's say I'm at work, and for a second, for some reason, I think I'm homeless, and I start trying to do these affirmations. I have an apartment. I have an apartment. What I'd do instead is I would remember that I have an apartment. I'd recognize, oh, I've always had an apartment. I don't need to do some sort of practice or affirmation to make that the case. However, even though I remember I have an apartment, Maybe there's some stressful feelings in my body from this whole experience of thinking I was homeless and that I don't have an apartment to go to at the end of the day. In the knowing that I have an apartment, I can let those feelings come up and relax them.
Mm.
So, this to me is what spiritual practice is about. The awakening, so to speak, the enlightenment, so to speak, which I think can be drastically misleading terms, is the first
Mm.
step. And so, no matter how much it doesn't feel like this experience right now is it, that this experience is reality, is the oneness, you recognize that this experience is awareness. You
Mm. Yeah.
and
Yeah,
from
you're
that point, the feelings of that not being it will naturally come up, of being like it can't be this. The feelings of this sucks, whatever it is, it will come
yeah.
up on their own.
Mm.
Hopefully
Yeah.
that made sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you were mentioned that you are an engineer. That is cool. Yeah, do you think mindfulness and meditation helped you becoming a better colleague and employee?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Because just a basic meditation practice, forget about all the spiritual notions of it. Just a basic silent sitting practice, body awareness, teaches you focus, it teaches you discipline, deep listening, non reaction, agility with your viewpoints. You can see things from the client perspective, you can see things from the subcontractor perspective more easily.
Mm. Yeah.
Just a habit that for 20 minutes a day that does those, that's already nuclear. That's powerful.
Mm.
And then if you can learn to take that openness and bring it into the workspace so that you're not accumulating stress as much, because that's what meditation does, is it makes it harder to accumulate stress and burnout. It allows moments of connection and nourishment to be placed throughout your entire day. This is extremely helpful for a job that's not exactly stress free, like
Mm.
a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
100%. And so that's hence my bio in my on X, engineered $1 billion data centers with mindfulness.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, deep self inquiry and meditation can sometimes lead people into incredibly difficult psychological states,
Yeah.
what some call the dark night of the soul. Have you experienced this personally, and what advice do you have for those who feel lost in the process?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think one of the reasons that the mind doesn't want to investigate experience, one of the reasons there's a resistance to sitting on your own in meditation is because there's all this dark, compressed emotion and just grief below the surface that's very disorienting if you have to face it. So yes, I've gone through that for sure. I think people who are even interested in this type of podcast or this type of topic have already had a degree of re-identification with consciousness, of awakening themselves, and a shift of identity that's very deep from going from, say, a Henry or a Salvador to a consciousness which doesn't necessarily have a name or quality. That's already, even though it was always the case, it's a big shift, and it can be disorienting for the mind to not have a grip on life like it thought it did. So, what happened for me, let me think back. Yeah, so it basically, I had this incessant drive for self improvement. I was doing the cold showers,
Mm.
the early morning workouts, the meditation as a self improvement measure, the social skills, like more stuff than I could remember, a bunch of stuff with my diet. And the
Yeah.
driving force for all of that was a sense of constant insufficiency. And in recognizing myself as consciousness, which is inherently complete in itself, it's not really missing anything, the whole drive to do all of that self improvement stuff stopped for a while. Now, I mean,
Mm.
fast forward, I love cold showers still. I still do a lot of that stuff. But for a period there, for a period of time, I didn't know what to do with myself, and I didn't know what was worthwhile pursuing in life, and I became very depressed. And so, and then all these emotions were just surfacing causelessly. For me, it was, I would say, mostly sadness. I think it didn't seem to have a cause, and I was never a sad person, so it was really shocking.
Yeah.
So to deal with that, what I would suggest is, you know, don't don't open doors too fast. Stay a bit grounded if you can. Some things that can help with that are like weightlifting, working out, um,
Mm.
a good social connection, just the typical human stuff to keep you intact with your humanness while this mystical component is driving you insane, basically.
Yeah.
And you just have to let yourself be completely crushed ultimately by these emotions, by the dark night.
Mm. And what kept you going during that dark moment? A lot of people would give up probably, and yeah, you didn't, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I saw what used to seem like a worthwhile pursuit, all the goals that I had, they no longer seemed worthwhile whatsoever. They seemed completely meaningless and hollow. So what used to keep me going disappeared. But I just knew the whole time that I mean, I basically just came to terms with, if this entire life is just my world being crushed and crumbling and me getting screwed over emotionally, then that's my life. That's okay. That's what I'm here. That's what will I will have been here for. And so I'm just going to keep doing the logical things. There's very few things that you have to do. So that's just going to be take care of your body. I mean, that's really about it. And in order to do that, you have to have some sort of income, some sort of social connection, and some sort of shelter and food.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
that's just do that. And that's basically taking care of your existence. That sounds depressing, and it was for a while. But
Yeah.
over time, it did seem to have some kind of a, like a well of compressed emotions that kind of decompressed themselves. Yeah. And then it ended, and I'm really just enjoy every day now. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's great. Yeah. Yeah, neuroscience and Buddhism both suggest that the self is an mental construct, an illusion. But
That's great.
even if we intellectually grasp this, our entire psychological experience seems built on the assumption of being a separate individual. How do you personally work with tension between knowing the self isn't real and still having to function as one?
Well, it's not really real, and you don't really have to function as one either. Yeah, I guess you kind of do have to function as like a self in society. I guess I could grant you that, but it doesn't even seem like there's a self. Like, for example, it's very obvious that there's no Henry here. It's There's no character. Like, for example, if you were in a if a robber came into your house right now and they looked at you, they wouldn't see a Salvador. They'd see a human body,
No.
right? They wouldn't see the Salvador character. And the reason is because they didn't bring one with.
Mm.
Okay, my computer just closed. Hopefully I'm still here.
Yeah, you
Um
are.
it's it's built into language that we are a self located, and it's built into thought because all thoughts generally apply things to the body of which they are a part, and they imply that that's a self. But it's just in any moment from your experience, there's not a self in it. It's impersonal. So this doesn't matter whose experience um, you're looking
Mm.
in. It doesn't matter what your experience is. If you look around, there's not a self there. In fact, we wouldn't even know what a self would look like because it's not a real thing.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, every belief we hold acts as a filter on reality. You've talked about how mental frameworks can't actually contain reality, only distort it. What are the most common belief traps people fall into, even when, even within spirituality and self improvement?
Yeah, good point. The mental framework cannot contain reality. The part cannot contain the whole. The whole contains the part, which sucks, right? But it's actually good news. It means that the only satisfying possibility regarding what you are is to be it and not to know it. And that's something I heard from Paul Hederman, by the way. And that's, in my experience, completely true. But but I strayed from your question there in pulling that quote up in my head. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
reel me in,
What?
please, Salvador. Help me.
Yeah. What do you think are the most common belief traps people fall into?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, even within spirituality.
Yeah, and I think most of the traps, in my experience, that I've fallen into occur after some level of identification shift and some level of interest in spirituality. Most of the traps are there. So the biggest one is what we discussed already, where it seems like there's going to be some gigantic awakening that happens.
Hmm.
And the
Yeah.
belief in that is a constant invalidation of our current experience. So as long as that invalidation is there, this is going to seem to not be it. By this meaning our current moment. So that's one of them. Um, I guess another one could just be dogmatically following a teacher, because we tend to think that if like a spiritual teacher, like these big guys like Eckhart or Muji, and you're sitting in the
Hmm.
crowd and you think like, oh, that up there on the stage, that's 170 pounds of enlightened meat, and over here is 170 pounds of unenlightened meat, and that itself is not true. That's a misperception. I think those guys are great. I love Eckhart, but that itself is a misperception. Um, what else do we have? The perception of having to practice yourself into being what you are, because you can look for you can look for your car keys, you can look for anything and find it with your awareness, but you can look for awareness forever because it's what you're looking from.
Hmm.
So to the the mind can't get the fact that it's already here, because anything the mind does is seemingly to get something else or to refer to something else or to get away from here. The mind is dualistic in its nature of thought. So basically, at the end of the day, you end up not really believing thought as a container for reality in general. Um,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, if someone goes deep enough into questioning the nature of their identity, they can hit a point where everything starts to feel unreal, even their own thoughts, emotions, and motivations. Um, where have you learned about navigating this space without losing psychological stability?
Yeah, sanity is important. And there are points where you feel like you're going crazy as this transition's happening, especially early on.
Mm.
Um, so you're suggesting that there's a point where reality starts to become unstable.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the notion of what reality was is is changing. It's going from a mental construct to back to reality, back to what it actually is, which isn't a thought, and it's something you can be, but it's not something you can know. right here, right now, by the
Mm,
way. It always deals with that
yeah.
as an
Mm,
ongoing moment to moment thing. And so the thing is, what generally is considered reality isn't necessarily reality. The general concept of reality, this is just for me. I'm sure it's different for every particular belief structure for everybody. But I had
yeah.
a very atheistic physical view of reality, right? Where it's there's a physical world, and what we agree upon as independent observers is consistent between our experiences is what's real.
Ah,
So a dream is not necessarily real, it's brain activity, and that's real because we can agree on that, but we can't necessarily each observe the dream. But this computer right here, Salvador, I could fly you over here to Arizona and show you this computer, and you would say it's here, so it's real. So there's
yes.
consistency across our experiences, and what that does is it invalidates experience itself as having an authority. So what's happening in the spiritual transition is that the sense of reality is transitioning from referential thought, which is referring to a consistent world, and it's the authority for what is real is going back to experience itself. For example, you're hearing this sound, you're hearing my voice. There's nothing I could do to convince you you're not. Or maybe I could gaslight you into it or something. But nonetheless, that thought would still be appearing in awareness. And by that measure, it has authority that it's real. Does that make sense?
Mm, yeah, that
That
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
consciousness has its own authority that ends up being greater than referential thought. Not saying referential thought isn't perfect tool for navigating the world as a body, perfect for
Mm,
that, but it doesn't have the authority of being. It doesn't have the authority of knowing being itself. And what we see eventually is that the ability to actually know existence directly is not a human ability. That's not something a human could do. Sure, the eyes, the ears, the thoughts, the senses are human senses. A human's going to have five senses: sensation,
mm,
thought, smell, sight. But the ability to register existence itself, which is what consciousness is more of a divine ability. And it's the ability of self apparent reality to know itself. That's a divine ability. That's not a human ability.
mm, yeah. Yeah. And do you think there's like layers of reality? There's like, do you think meditation or non-dual awareness can give you a more sober perspective of reality?
Yeah. Yeah, well, sober is an interesting term because sober can mean a healthily running delusion in some cases.
Mm, yeah.
And in that case, no, you don't get the sober view of reality. You get
Like
the
the
what?
yeah, I was like yeah, maybe I used the wrong word. Like, do you think meditation or enlightenment can give you cleaner, yeah, maybe clean, a more clean view of reality?
It takes away the shitty view. It takes away the unreal view. That's more what it does. It takes
Mm.
it takes away you as an independent, long-lasting individual entity.
Uh,
It takes away your conviction that that is a thing, because it's always experienced as an assumption that it's there somewhere, but it's never actually right here in experience, which is, by the way, one of the first things that caused me to get interested in consciousness in the first place. I was like, what the heck? There's no me? Like, I can't find a self here, but this isn't happening to anybody, but it somehow still knows that it's happening. So that
mm,
was one of the first things. The
yeah.
views, the way we view things from being a long lasting, independent individual entity, a self, are distorted. That's not an accurate view of reality. In relative reality, that can be accurate, but in a more absolute view of truth, that's not going to serve as true. It's not going to be satisfying. There's no satisfaction in mental views of things generally, especially in the absolute view. So by taking that process away, yes, we do get a more sane, real view of things, but it was always there the whole time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Many people turn to meditation or self-inquiry as a way to escape suffering, but paradoxically, the desire to
Yeah.
escape can itself be a source of suffering. How do you help people see through this?
No, that's a great point. And so the desire to escape right there is your
Mm.
first is the escape happening? Because what's happening
Ah,
is this is why practice is helpful, because naturally when we start to see the truth, we start to get all these weird things like the desire to escape. I feel like even that doesn't start to happen until some level of awareness, so to speak, is raising, even though I don't really see awareness as something that could raise. But as you identify yourself less as an individual, you'll get all these weird things, the desire to escape. So instead of engaging with that on its terms, we see that the desire to escape is based in an illusion, and all the associated emotions with it, which are resistance, by the way, are naturally coming up in that desire. And that's our meditation practice right there, is just seeing that. And
mm,
what you'll notice is that you didn't have to start a meditation practice for that to happen. You just had a desire to escape. So at that point, it's about re-recognizing yourself as at search for the one who's trapped. That's what you do. And you don't find the one who's trapped. Show me who's trapped. You don't find anything. And so this
mm.
whole emotional foot framework starts to lose its footing right in front of your face, and it
Yeah,
starts to collapse and dissolve. And that's I think I've heard that called transfiguration or alchemy or something.
yeah, maybe.
And that is the eternal awareness. Eternal, in other words, it's in its final position already, seeing the illusory trappedness. So that's how you navigate that. You just question that whole structure itself, and it will disappear. It might hurt. It might actually hurt a bit because it's charged up. It's all juiced up with all that pain. Real
Yeah,
juicy. But that's how you know it's the real thing. It's juiced up. It's going to actually produce a juicy tactile change,
yeah,
if that makes any
yeah,
sense at all.
yeah. Um, Many spiritual paths focus on transcending the ego, but a lot of unresolved psychological material still lurks into the background. How do you approach shadow work, facing hidden fears, suppressed emotions, and processed trauma, while staying on a path of deep awareness?
Yeah, was I'm very fortunate to not have a huge, at least as far as I can tell, boatload of trauma behind me that was
Mm.
fueling everything. But everybody has some level of emotional, I guess, karma, you could say, compacted emotions that when you fully let yourself show up every day, that stuff is going to come shooting out of your system. It's going to come exploding out. Um, and the more trauma, from what I've heard and read, the more trauma that you've experienced, the harder and the more viciously your system will not let you be showing up here fully present.
Mm.
It'll be pulling you away like a monkey mind. So to me, it's the same process, but it's just a bit longer if there's the trauma and the shadow work, which is that, again, you start from the end, which is that The endpoint is that the formless awakeness that you are, which cannot be traumatized or hurt, is present in and as every experience that you ever have and anyone ever could have. And by it recognizing who it is, it looks back at all those emotions. As an analogy, you could say, instead of looking at the emotion as if you're in the prison, you're the prisoner in the prison cell and you need to be freed. The shadows need to be let out of the shadow and into the light. You're
Mm,
now the warden of the prison with the key, and you
yeah.
see the emotion in the cage. And we tend to have so much compassion that we think it's us in the cage.
Yeah.
But with the recognition of what you are, you're on the outside of the cage and you can open the door. And in some cases, you need to go in, walk into the prison cell, the poor prisoner, which is your compacted trauma or intense emotion or sensation, and you need to give it a hug. And in some
Mm,
cases, especially if you have access to a level of freedom now from identifying yourself as awakeness, when you walk into that cage and you go and you give that trauma a deep hug, it will be, you will have to go in back into it, and you will seem to lose your freedom. But we have to have the courage to go back into it, give that prisoner, so to speak, a hug so deeply that we lose ourselves in it, in a sense. And the only
mm,
thing that would have the confidence to go from this absolutely free perspective and come back to such a human, raw, painful thing and just lose yourself into it, who would have the confidence to do that? The only thing that would have the confidence to do that would be God, or would be awakeness itself. And by doing that very action, you set that thing free. And it happens
yeah.
on an unknown schedule. And I'm speaking very abstractly. Hopefully, this is hitting for some people. But by doing that, it's very much like the Bible verse: "For God so loved the world that He gave it His only begotten Son." So you're going from your freedom back into this horrible bondage of trauma, and you're giving yourself to that as an act of
Mm,
love. And that act of love will tend to let it start to become free over time. With the caveat that if that doesn't make sense, just do whatever works.
yeah,
Go to
yeah.
therapy, go to the gym. Do what works. Don't
Yeah.
don't go too far into the deep end if it's destabilizing too much, you know? There's no absolutely right way.
Yeah. That's different form. Yeah. No. Now I wanted to explore some of your tweets. In a recent tweet, I actually told you that it was really great. You said if your consciousness switched to someone else's body, including inheriting all their thoughts, memories, impulses, perceptions, and their consciousness switched to yours, would anything actually change? Yeah, I'm curious to know your perspective on this.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for pulling that out. And I went to this consciousness program at Harvard where we studied
Really?
consciousness from all different angles. Yeah, it's called mind brain consciousness.
But it's like a year
It
or
was
like a
the program.
yeah.
It was over the summer. It was a summer school, college
Cool.
school course. And this was a similar question was posed in that course. So that's where I got this tweet from. So the question basically is, yeah, if your awareness were to switch with someone else's and you were to be in their body, and that includes that you now have all of their thoughts, impulses, perceptions, sensations, and that theirs switched into yours, would you notice a difference? And it's a trick question because in order to say yes or no, and it was a poll and the only choices were yes and no, so I'm a menace for doing that. But if you believe that your consciousness is localized inside your body, which is what if your thoughts have a grapple on what awareness is, they're going to think that. If you think that, then you're going to think you're going to notice a difference. But you're not going to notice a difference because that's the case already. That the consciousness is formless. So there's no difference between the consciousness looking through the Salvador human suit, who I'm talking to, and the Henry human suit. Anything you can point to that's going to be a noticeable thing, that's what we call a form. So if you can notice it, so you can notice my voice, you can notice a sensation, that's not it, because that's a form. You're perceiving from formlessness. You can't see it. It doesn't have a form. But because of that, there's no distinction between the formlessness of you and I. So, for example, spiritual books often talk about an infinite, endless, awake, empty void. How many infinite, empty, awake voids could there be? Where would you put a second one? There's only one. And so you could think of this. This is actually a radical thing to consider, to even think this, compared to what people usually think. Because what we're considering now is that the experience that you're having now, would you agree that it's made of consciousness? That's the ingredient there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if anyone understood that question that I just asked, they would say, yeah, that's, if you took away the consciousness, you took away the experience, right? So what I'm saying basically is that we have to consider that your experience and my experience, what they're made of right now, are made of the same thing. Directly there in your experience, they're both made of that same thing. In fact, if consciousness looks out of the Salvador unit, the Salvador human, it's going to see a set of human perceptions that are formed by the sights, the eyes, the ears, the different perceptual mechanisms. And if it looks out of the Henry suit, it's going to see a different set of perceptions that are based on my human makeup, right? If my eyes didn't work, I wouldn't see anything. However, the thing that's looking out of those eyes, what I'm suggesting is that it's the same thing. Right here.
Yeah.
That there's only one of them. And it doesn't leave. Do you know the now, by the way? Have you ever heard that term?
Now?
The now, yeah. Like in a spiritual book.
Yeah. But it's not very deep.
Not very
but
deep?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, perfect. Well, then we'll make it deep right now. So, would you agree that all you experience, at least in reference to time, is now, the now?
Yes, I would.
Would you agree that everybody would say that same thing, even animals, if they could understand you?
Yes.
And would you agree that it's the same now? Or is your now at some other point, some other time?
No, yeah.
It's the same one. So we're talking about the same now. And the idea is less about each human having consciousness, and it's more about the now itself is awake. The now itself is awake. There's no time in that. It's just is awake, basically.
Yeah.
And it's the same unity that you could say, like, are you sitting at a desk?
I am.
Okay, so you can kind of see that your desk is taking up a certain amount of space, right?
Yes.
And I can see that my desk is taking up a certain amount of space. But and this is just in the physical, contemporary way people see things. Just the physical space itself isn't limited to that desk, right? Like it also holds your whole apartment or house.
Yeah.
And I notice the space here, and what I would suggest is that it's the same space in in Portugal as here in Arizona. It's just another part of the space, right?
Yeah. It is.
So I can look right here in my own experience and I can see the same space that you're looking at. Isn't that
Mm,
cool?
yeah.
And
Yeah,
imagine
that's it.
now we add the quality of just the bare quality of it being awake.
Mm.
And we
Yeah, I
have
like. Yeah.
blank awake space. And that's the only, and then from that blank awake space, there's no Salvador or Henry that could be found, basically. And whoever's listening, check with your name.
Mm. Well, yeah.
There's sensation and
This.
perception.
Yeah, this is very cool. Well, appreciate that, Henry. Yeah, you also mentioned, and I'm quoting, the DMN, default mode network, is truly fascinating. The sense of me is a wonder of nature.
Mm,
Yeah, could you elaborate on how the default mode network influences our perception of self and its
yeah.
implications for mindfulness practice?
Yeah. From what I understand, the default mode network is responsible for generating the sense that
Yeah,
this is, that I'm here localized.
yeah.
The experiment we just did a minute ago is in direct conflict with what the default mode network apparently suggests. So that's the sense of
Mm,
self, the sense of locality. And there is a sense of locality here for me. There's times when it's completely dropped away and everything is just brightly revealed as impersonal. And there's
mm,
a, for most of the day, there's a sense of locality and there's a felt sense of this kind of being my experience. But it's, but no one's having that. There's no one in the experience that's having that. And the reason it's a wonder of nature is because it's like a paradox. Reality itself is impersonal, even by most people's general notion of it. Like, let's just say the physical reality. Most people don't think atoms are personal.
mm.
But somehow, when the atoms form this particular body, it's mine. Like, how does that make any sense? But
Yeah,
somehow the default mode network makes that make total sense. And it's weird because you can't even really fully see what it is until it's disappeared before. But it's just a profoundly convincing sense of this being a personal set of experiences that are just mine right here.
mm,
But
yeah,
you don't have to have that disappear to see that there's no you there. It's just a sense. If you had a sense that there was a hippopotamus in your room that was going to eat you, you could feel the fear, you could feel the sense, but you could still look around your room and realize it isn't there. You know, you
mm,
could check under the bed, check in the closet.
yeah. Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I appreciate a lot your time, Henry, and yeah, see you soon, man. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Salvador. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.